Hey, Next Levelers, welcome to the Next Level Show, where we explore what works and wasn't done, I can't even talk today, what works and what doesn't when creating and growing companies. I'm your host, Bob Gibbons. So our guest today got his start in commercial real estate after receiving the highest score ever on a college final exam in a real estate class, and it was being taught by an adjunct professor, and she offered him a job right there on the spot and her own company. And 5 years later, he left that, started his own business, and amazingly, 3 months after doing that, she called him up and said, "You need to buy my company," which he did. But that's just where the story starts. And we're excited to have Walt Batansky with the Avocat Group from Tampa, Florida with us today. Welcome to the show, Walt.
Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate you having me.
All right, so the most important question I have to start off with is, did you really ace that test, or did your parents pay somebody to take it for you?
It was actually only a 94, which
so it wasn't a perfect score.
Which wasn't a perfect score.
I'm so disappointed.
It was such a hard test that that happened to be the best to that date, anyhow. So,
well, I've taken a lot of tests. I've gotten a lot of 94s and less, but hard tests are always hard to figure out, because you want to think that you're better, but you don't always know that until you see the curve, right?
I think I just got hired because they needed a gopher, and I happened to be available.
Oh, so you were willing to do the menial stuff.
It was before they invented fax machines, so they needed somebody to drive contracts around town.
Wow,
so
you're dating yourself.
I was an Uber driver for contracts.
Uber before Uber was ever heard of, before fax was ever heard of.
Right.
Yeah, I was in business before fax was a thing first. We had telex. You remember telex?
Yes, sure. Right.
Holy cow!
Everybody had that on their business card.
I hadn't thought about telex forever.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, so in that class, she was teaching the class. Was she teaching the class specifically to try and find recruits, do you think? Or why was she doing that?
Just for fun. It was actually a he.
Oh, it was a he. I'm sorry.
A he. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, he used to teach the kids, and then we'd go up to the local pizza joint, and he would buy pizzas for anybody that wanted to go talk more. And we'd sit around with pizzas and a pitcher of beer and ask him questions, and I liked him. It sounded interesting. At the time, I was going for photojournalism,
wow.
And that was my major. And he said, "Look, if your photos are good, you don't need the photojournalism degree, and if your photos are bad, photojournalism degree is not going to help you."
Right.
So he said, "Why don't you change it to finance so you have something to fall back on?" It sounded like a good idea, and
That's funny because I had somebody that worked for me one time that had a ceramics degree. And she was a great person. She was a great assistant. But I was thinking, really, a ceramics? And then she went back and got a master's in it.
Wow.
And I asked her, I said, "Why are you going back to get a master's in that?" She goes, "Because I can sell my pieces for more money." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me. Either I like the piece or I don't. I don't give a crap what your degree is."
Right.
So it's kind of the same with photojournalism, you're thinking.
Yep.
So did you want to be like a news photo guy or what?
Well, I was doing concerts at the time. I did rock concerts.
Oh.
I did 320 shows, from The Who, the Rolling Stones, you name it. Met lots of them. Went on tour with Van Halen for
No way.
a short leg, yeah. But back in the days of the Stadium Rock Journey and all of those guys. And
yeah, I went to those concerts.
Yeah. Well, I used to get backstage and I would get in the barrier. I mean, my real goal was to get in the barrier.
Okay.
But
and did you get paid for that? Or
I got paid for that, yeah. So not only was I, drinking Heinekens in the barrier while everybody else was getting squished in the crowd, but
wow.
But I didn't make enough money, obviously.
So were you hired by the bands or by some?
I actually worked for the Tampa Tribune, which was the big Tampa newspaper.
Did you grow up in Tampa?
No, but I moved there in '77 to go to college.
Okay. So you've been there ever since?
Ever since, you bet.
That's awesome. So what happened with tell us the story about why did your professor want to sell you the company?
Well, I was the number one sales guy for one thing, and the number two guy went with me.
When you started your own?
When I started my own.
And why did you do that?
And I should say we both left. He came along shortly after I left, and I guess this guy was also approaching retirement.
Okay.
He kind of famously would go to Europe for a month every year, the entire month of August, and we couldn't get hold of him.
Oh my.
So, and in the real estate business, I mean, stuff's happening, deals are closing, contracts are, we're dealing with attorneys, everything else, and he would go like, "I'm going to be gone. You can't get hold of me." He'd give us some money in an account that we had signatory over, and he said, "If there's a problem, just take care of it." and I'll see you in a month.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that, this was back before cell phones too.
Yeah, so he could really get away.
He really did get away. There was no email, there's no cell phones. I mean, he was incommunicado for 30 days. Yep.
I just got back from Germany and Austria for 2 weeks, but every single day I'm checking my emails, I'm checking my phone messages, I'm talking to clients. I mean, I can't get away anywhere in the world, it seems.
Yeah, I still think about his month off sabbaticals, and that's kind of a
Enviously.
fantasy for me. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I was actually supposed to spend the month of August in the mountains in New Mexico, northern New Mexico near Colorado, 2016. We had the place all set up, ready to go, rented, and then I found out that their internet was so bad. And I said, well, I just can't be up there for a month and not have internet and be able to conduct business. And so we ended up canceling.
Right.
So I still need to get back to that. So, all right. So he comes to you and says, hey, buy my company. So it was basically because once you two guys left, it wasn't as good?
I mean, no, absolutely not. I mean, he could have kept going, but he was ready for retirement anyhow. And we were the best candidates to do it.
Okay.
And
but then he comes to you and says, buy my company. Did he come along with it?
No, I mean, the idea was that he was phasing out.
Okay.
So he was a great mentor. I mean, arguably everything I know about real estate I learned from him, and very just highly ethical guy, believed in doing right for the client. Wasn't in it for the money, was in it for the love of real estate, and for the same reason he taught kids, as an adjunct professor. I mean, he just wanted to kind of spread the word and explain the strategy and nuances. He was very big into all the nuances. Back in those days, a purchase contract was, 1 or 2 pages. A lease was 3 pages. I don't know if you remember Franklin Form's leases. Well,
oh, yeah.
Now just the hazardous materials provision is 3 pages,
So, exactly. I mean, I haven't seen a lease less than about 30 or 40 pages for 15, 20 years.
Right. But I would ask him, I go, well, who customarily pays for this? Who customarily pays this closing costs or these costs in a lease or whatever? And he would go, the other guy. That was his answer.
Always
the other guy, right?
Depends on who I'm representing.
Right, exactly.
How funny. So what year was this that you ended up starting on your own company?
So this was 84.
Oh, no. So 84 meant you had 2 years left before the horrible 86 tax law killed all real estate.
Right, tax reform. Yeah, you bet. So I still, we had a Lotus 123 spreadsheet that we would plug in. We mostly we were doing primarily buyer's brokering. And that was just a radically new concept back then. I mean, we had lots of agents tell us you can't represent the buyer and get paid by the seller. But in fact, you could. You just had to disclose it.
Right.
So we'd have to point that out to them. But we were going to small business owners, attorneys, CPAs, business owners, and saying, look, you should never lease your real estate. You should own it because we have 15-year accelerated depreciation. Then it went to 17-year. It will always make sense. When we plug the numbers in, you're in a 50% tax bracket. We had 50% tax brackets back then. You could borrow the money at 18% interest. You're still going to have positive after-tax cash flow. And then all of the capital gains all of the gains are captured as that depreciation is captured as capital gains. So just super, super favorable. When tax reform happened, it just flip-flopped everything. It was 31 in a year and a half year straight line. It was all recaptured as ordinary income. We plugged the numbers into our Lotus 123 spreadsheet, and it said you should always rent instead of lease. Unless you thought there was going to be 8 or 10% annual appreciation, which obviously we know there's not.
Right.
Then it just didn't make sense. And my wife had joined, my then-to-be wife had joined the company by then. And I remember looking at her across the desk and going like, we're out of business. I mean, 90% of our business is going to guys and saying, hey, you should own, you shouldn't lease. And she just calm as a cucumber, she looked at me and said, we're going to represent tenants. It's like, okay. And we had done that already, when the need arose, but that wasn't really a core business. When our clients needed to lease, we'd help them lease. But we weren't really out soliciting that much.
Well, because tenant representation, which that became to be known as, really didn't exist to much degree at that point.
It didn't exist at all in Florida. And, obviously without the internet, I mean, it did in New York and Chicago.
And we had it here already. But we didn't really know about it here until the late 70s, early 80s. And it was just a tiny, tiny percentage of people that were specializing in that.
Yeah.
But hardly anybody. But yeah, so was that pivot? I mean, how did you convince your clients?
Well, we also, up until that point, we would occasionally sell somebody, a group of CPAs would buy a 100,000 square foot building and only need to occupy 30,000 of it. And they'd say, well, the only way we want to buy this is if you're going to manage and lease it. We don't want to be in the leasing business. So we would represent them. So we were still not representing professional landlords and developers, but we were representing our business owner clients that had excess space.
Sure.
And that was pretty common because we were doing a lot of sales. Once that happened, we said, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're only going to represent, business owners to buy or primarily lease their space. If there's a big assignment like that, we're just going to refer that and manage the process for them. Okay. But we really just didn't want to be in the process of listing. And so still to this day, we really don't take listings. We'll maybe help someone dispose of some space, sublease or whatever, but generally we'll find, our attitude has always been, look, we're going to find the very best person. The very best person is probably someone who's getting calls off a sign all day, every day down the road, but they don't have this exact size or this exact view or this exact, unique attribute.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, we're both in the same business.
Right.
So you're a tenant representative. I am as well. We come from a bit different backgrounds, but we do similar things in primarily different markets, but we also have an ongoing business relationship as well, and we'll get into some of that later in the show. But just for the listeners, just don't want to confuse anybody. And by the way, I forgot to mention that you can find out more about Walt's company at avocatgroup.com, and Avocat is spelled AVOCAT group.com, and you'll learn more than you ever wanted to know about tenant representation. It's a great website. All right, we're going to take a break. We will be right back after this. Welcome back. We are talking to Walt Batansky of Avocat Group. Check them out online at avocatgroup.com, AVOCAT. What in the heck does avocat mean, Walt?
So I pronounce it avocat.
Avocat, all right.
But it is a French term. Literally means trusted advisor, but it is the term that they use for attorney over there. So if you're going to go see Avocat, or you'll actually see that on door signs, it'll have, say, Bob Givens Avocat. So that means attorney over there. And our CEO is a guy named Eric Burson. He is an attorney. He's almost Mr. Attorney. So and he only represents law firms and has spent the last 35 years doing big law firms, global transactions, all Moscow, Beijing, Abu Dhabi, certainly plenty in New York, Chicago, Washington. So he liked that name because that's associated with law firms. Eric's a very interesting guy. He was the first person ever to graduate from Stanford Law School with a perfect 4.0 average.
Oh, that's annoying.
There's a little bit of a story behind that.
I'm sure there is.
He was president of the student body at Stanford Law. He was on the Stanford Law Review, which is a very prestigious thing to belong to. So he's almost Mr. Stanford, and so he's just very pro-attorney everything.
Yeah.
And so that was a good name, and we are trusted advisors. I mean, that's what we try to do and be for people. So.
Now, Avocat, I'd say
Avocat.
Avocat, okay. So Avocat, it kind of almost sounds like advocate here.
Right.
Is there any parallel to those two?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
that's where the word advocate comes from.
So those are
You bet.
almost synonymous.
Right.
Because like, REATA is the name of my company, REATA, and that stands for Real Estate Advisor and Tenant Advocate. So I guess I could say tenant avocat
Right.
if I wanted to be really, really annoying about it. All right, so you started your company, but when you started your company, you went from being number one producer in a shop that somebody else owned to being the owner of the company. That changes your life considerably, I would think.
Right. So many people start an industry. Whether you're an architect or a real estate broker, you get into it because you love what you do. You don't love running a business. You don't necessarily love maybe sales and marketing.
Managing people,
but you've got to do all those things. So fortunately, my then girlfriend, now wife, who I mentioned before, joined the business, kind of saw that I was in over my head. I wasn't really doing what I was best at.
Okay.
And so she offered to step in and handle a lot of the admin and oversight. And fortunately she did. And, 35 years of marriage later.
She's still doing that?
She doesn't still do it. She's not actively in the day-to-day of the business, but she certainly has an opinion on all of it. So,
Well.
and she has been critical, and she'll remind me that we represent tenants because that was her idea. So.
Oh, well, of course. I should hope so. I've met your lovely wife, and I would think less of her if she didn't remind you of that on a regular basis. And you've met my wife. She works with me full time as well, but
you bet.
And she does a lot of that admin, management, operations kind of stuff as well, which is helpful. But that is still a fundamental mind switch. Was there any other things that you saw that you had to really fundamentally change in the way you thought about approaching your business because you're now the owner?
When I originally joined, we had 28 people. I'm the last man standing of that original 28.
Okay.
And everybody needs something, and everybody is, positioning for themselves. Everybody's positioning for their clients. It was just very political. I wasn't not only not involved, but not even really aware that those kind of things existed.
Yeah.
And so, you got to learn that stuff. And that's part of being the entrepreneur. As a young kid, I was only 24 at the time. That was a big, fast way to mature.
Yeah, no kidding. So did you actually, you started in real estate when you were still in college?
Yeah, I was 19. Yeah.
So how many years in college did you work in real estate?
So about 2. Again, when I started, to be fair, I was their gopher, cleaned out the refrigerator. I pretty much did everything in the business, and got my license and just started helping out, on transactions as kind of an assistant, learning. When I graduated in December of '82, and I worked full-time all through college, so it took me an extra semester or 2 to graduate because I was working full-time. When I graduated in December of '82, I was pretty active and had actually made more money in that month than the starting salary was for somebody with a finance degree at that time. So,
Wow.
So originally, even at that time, I didn't think I was necessarily going to spend the rest of my life in real estate, let alone with that company. I thought, actually, finance degree, I thought, a big company like Merrill Lynch, that would be ideal. But I want to say, without looking it up, maybe June, July, August of 1980, prime rate hit 21.5%. Mm-hmm. FHA and VA were at 17.5%. The real estate market completely tanked. And I remember that Merrill Lynch laid off 30,000 people in one fell swoop. So I certainly, if I'd gone to work for them, I would have been gone anyway.
What did your major end up being, by the way?
Finance. Yeah.
Oh, finance. Okay.
Yeah, I did.
So the parallels here are a little scary because I was a finance major, and I also started in college. So my last year was in college. I was working in commercial real estate as well, but I was working more on the landlord side of things, so to speak, for a developer, land flipper, really more than anything. And so anyway, and I stayed with that company after I graduated. So I was with them for about 4.5 years. So anyway, interesting little aside. So you start the company. You bring the other next most productive guy with you, and what's the first thing you do? I mean, do you get to bring all your clients with you? Do they follow you? I mean,
we started building a database of clients, and back then we bought an IBM AT computer, which was about yay big, and I want to say the computer and the dot matrix printer were like $11,000. So it was a huge investment at that time. And in today's dollars, it's probably 3 times that, right?
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for us. And we bought a little program called Q&A, which was a database program, and started building our database of clients and prospective clients. And arguably, we still have that database today. I mean, I have remnants And every now and then somebody will come across notes in it from the 1990s that
and they're thinking, did you even have computers in the 1990s?
most of them weren't born.
You were
Many
still
of them
using
weren't born back then.
stone tablets, weren't you?
Right, right.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I still remember in college we used the punch cards on the giant, computers that were as big as a room. But you're kind of a what I would consider a technologist within the commercial real estate business. I mean, we're members of a organization together called the Alliance of Tenant Representatives. So we're both members. That's how we met. So we meet up at national conferences, and within that group, you definitely have the persona of being the thinker, especially as it relates to technology being applied to commercial real estate. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that you bought that computer way back when for 11 grand. What are you seeing today in your industry, our industry, that technology is disrupting?
Well, I'm really excited about the next 10 years for all of us. Not just even in real estate, but I think our minds are going to be blown by the advancements that are going to happen. In the same way that we've seen phones go, since the iPhone debuted 12 years now. I think we're going to see that in all kinds of other areas. Certainly the autonomous cars are going to be a big deal, and that's going to be a big deal not only because it's going to change the way we do transportation. I mean, I haven't owned a car for 5 years now, so I'm a big Uber and Lyft guy. But I think everybody's going to do that. I think we're going to subscribe to services. I think a car is going to be kind of a liability because, the biggest investment that somebody makes in a vehicle is not the cost of the car and the insurance and the gas. It's the labor of the operator. So when I'm driving, I can carry on a conversation, especially if I'm on the interstate, but you're concentrating on something else. It's not your primary responsibility. But when I'm sitting in the back of the Uber, I can work and take a half-hour ride, and I get a half an hour of great work in, and I'm magically transported to wherever I need to be, and they say we're here, and I get out. So I think that's going to, our generation, I think that's a little slow coming to realize, but I think the younger generations get that already.
Yeah.
And once we start getting vehicles where there's no other driver, so you're not sharing that experience with somebody from another country that doesn't speak your language or whatever. You can have private conversations. You can have a television screen with Wi-Fi and either watch Netflix or get on your computer and do whatever you need. I think there's going to be a real big mind shift.
And here in Dallas, we're recording this in Dallas, and there's an office park just north here called the Hall Office Park or the Hall Park, and they actually have an autonomous vehicle program being tested there right now. So if you are in one of their office buildings, and I think they have probably 15 office buildings within this park, plus some retail and other stuff, at any time you want, you can go out and get in that autonomous vehicle. There's no driver, and it takes you wherever you want to go within the park. You can't go outside the park yet.
Right.
They're just doing it within the park.
Right.
So it's already coming.
Well, I think one of the first adopters will be downtowns, where you'll go into downtown Dallas, and because they want to eliminate traffic and parking and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
If you work downtown and you want to get to the other side to go to lunch or do a meeting, they'll have autonomous cars that'll take you right within a 2 or 3 square mile radius, certainly. Then I think you're going to see the HOV lanes become autonomous lanes, and once you're sitting in that traffic and you're watching the autonomous cars go, they can be just 2 meters apart and go on 70 miles an hour, without any
No problem.
without the caterpillaring that happens in traffic. You're going to go like, what the heck am I doing this for?
Exactly. So your lease is going to expire in the future, and you're trying to figure out how soon should I start working on that? Is it 6 months or a year or 2 years before my lease expiration? Well, there isn't an exact date. This is Bob Gibbons with Riata Commercial Realty, and my clients always meet with me about 2 years before their expiration date, and we create a strategy. And then we review that strategy again a year later. And so we're always working toward what's right for them, not what they think might be an arbitrary date by which they need to figure this out. The keys in determining how much time you need are whether or not you're going to move, whether or not you need to expand, will there need to be construction on wherever you're going to go to, and all those things take more time. So do a strategy meeting a couple years out with your advisor, and that'll make things a lot more clear. For more information, please go to texastenantrep.com. That's texastenantrep.com. All right, we are back talking to Walt Batansky of Avocat. I don't know why I keep screwing that up. I've said Avocat for so long, so Avocat. Avocatgroup.com. Check it out. So we were talking about technology and how it's going to apply to commercial real estate. We talked about self-driving vehicles, et cetera, autonomous. What other kind of aspects of technology are you seeing?
Well, I think obviously the bigger impact of the autonomous vehicles is that 20% of all urban space now is used for parking, and we're not going to need that. The car will drop you off at the front door. You don't have to spiral through the buildings. There doesn't have to even be parking in the buildings. The cars will go park themselves somewhere 6 blocks away and come get you when you call them on your app. So that's going to change how we use space in urban areas. And then for distribution facilities, they are limited by, they want to be right off the interstate. They want to be where the population is because their drivers can only drive 10 hours, it's like an airline pilot. But now you could put that distribution center in the middle of the desert where land is $10 an acre, being facetious, but, inexpensive. And these trucks will be able to run 24/7 by 365. So it's going to just change that whole greenfield planning of how distribution is done.
Right. Now, I've also seen AI to some extent, a rudimentary AI being applied to real estate. There are a couple of companies, Tenant Base being one of them, Trust being another. I understand Cushman & Wakefield just created one of their own to compete with those two, where you kind of use some sort of bot, like a chat bot, to try and automate some of the preliminary inquiry that you would do with a client. I find that to be I don't think that's in the client's best interest right at the moment, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not even sure that those are really using AI as much as they are creating the illusion of AI, because if it was really using AI, it would serve up the response immediately. You wouldn't have to put your stuff in and wait a day for their AI bots to scan it and get it back to you. The AI bots don't take that long. So, but good, to their credit, good for them. They're preparing for that, and the day will come when that will happen automatically. And there are some things out there like Drift. You've been on the chat things where you can type in certain things that will recognize phrases, such as if you say, "What's your pricing?" It'll say, "Would you like to see our pricing page? Here's the link," and so it identifies that. So we've been trying to digitize our business as much as we're able to. One of the things that we do is we auto-scan leases. And before we used to scan them in and abstract them, but now we'll actually use it to identify certain phrases, proximity of words within it, to serve up, here's maybe something in the lease that we should consider. So, a very simple example might be the words "as is." So if a tenant's taking a lease as is, it'll serve up, hey, make sure that the landlord is warranting the heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical, and that the premises are in compliance with all applicable rules, codes, and ordinances. So it finds phrases and it can get more complex than that, certainly. But we've integrated that so that our staff is able to get those things immediately and have discussions.
Kind of flags them early. I mean, they'll still review the lease, but this flags them to sort of force them to at least focus on those without missing that by accident.
You bet. So we've built a whole platform looking at all the things that we do from the time we get hired from a client until the time the lease is done and they move in, that we can automate that way.
Okay.
And it's not to the point where, and I'm not sure really that it'll ever be to the point where it would replace a human being ever,
Right.
And I compare that, and there's a lot of talk that, it's all going to be online and you're just going to buy it. Well, no, it's not the same as ordering an Uber. With an Uber, all you need to trust is that somebody's going to pick you up on the corner and they have the ability to get you to the next corner and drop you off. It's almost like having an app for brain surgery or you can have an app that you could take the controls from your airline pilot the next time you're on a plane. You could do that with technology, but it's probably not the smartest thing to do. And I don't think that technology is ever going to be completely replace attorneys, although some people would argue that, or real estate brokers. I mean, it's going to be a long, long, long time before that is done. And there are not some human elements that need to be considered that aren't quite quantifiable. Now, again, the computers can serve up all kinds of suggestions.
Right.
But there is a very human element, probably like telling a joke, that is just subtle that I think.
Yeah, I had a guest on the show a few weeks ago named Dave Copps, and Dave is an AI expert, and he was a guest on a live event called the Digital Fight Club, and it was something here in Dallas. Digital Dallas is the organization that put it on. The guy that created that, Michael Pratt's been on the show, and anyway, in that they were kind of debating the whole AI thing, and Mark Cuban was on the panel of people to ask them questions, and he said, tomato is a fruit, so wisdom is. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember how he said this. Basically, it was that your fact is that the tomato is a fruit. Wisdom tells you not to put it into a fruit salad. So AI and computers are really good at the facts, but it's not really good at the wisdom part. What do you do with those facts whenever you put them together? You can create a matrix of all kinds of if-then scenarios, and does it fit this, does it not fit that? But what do you do with that information at the end of the day? And yeah, you can build in chain of if-thens, but at the end of that, then what?
Right.
And what if it doesn't fit into all of that? You still got to have somebody who can figure that out.
Well, real estate is a business of human motivations, and so I think that's going to be very hard for the computers to ever understand what's motivating. When we work with a client, the CEO has a certain motivation. The CFO has a different one, maybe save money, right? The CEOs might be image or prestige or
stay close to home.
Stay close to home. Right, you bet. Local managers, regional managers, everybody kind of has their own personal motivations. The landlords certainly do. Every tenant is unique. I mean, if you have a bank, they want signage rights. They want lobby, right? They don't want to be on the 12th floor.
They want exclusivity.
Right? They want exclusivity. But other companies, the attorneys, they might want the 12th floor because they want the views. They don't want to be on the first floor, right? So knowing all those subtleties, and even within a company, law firms are real unique because you need to understand how many are senior partners that are basically on near retirement, how many are the young guys that don't need the big offices and don't care about that. So that's all those nuances, all those motivations are something that again, I won't tell you it's impossible, but it will take a very, very long time before they can get that right.
I think there's going to be a lot of ways for technology to enhance and improve what we do, but I can't imagine it quite totally replacing us. The other thing I kind of go back to is that I hear a lot of people say, well, residential real estate is a very emotional-based decision, whereas commercial is a very logic-based system. And having been in commercial real estate now for 35 years, I say BS to that.
Right.
I mean,
right. I agree.
You would think that is logical. And if you get down to the final 3 shortlist buildings, the bottom line is they all should be able to accommodate the client's needs. They all should be able to, be accessible to their customers, to their employees, et cetera. And so the lowest cost should win. But it rarely does because everything is not equal. No 2 buildings are exactly the same. There's always a qualitative aspect to the decision. You find that to be true?
Yep, absolutely. There's a culture factor that is with every company, and so they've got to kind of consider that and translating that. Sometimes they have a hard time even articulating that themselves. Mm-hmm. That makes it very nuanced. And back in the day, finding real estate was the challenge. People would be like, can you find me a building? Yeah, well, it's not hard to find them. They're all online now. Everybody can find them. You can find them yourself.
Right.
You take a Google aerial map and you can pick them all out from the aerial map. So It's not about finding, it's about making intelligent decisions. And so our business has evolved into the decision making. We help people make smart decisions.
Right. Yeah, and they don't know what they don't know. There's so many things. And I also use the thing, and I'd like to kind of shift into the whole conflict of interest discussion, because I tell people all the time, if I was going to sue you, would you be willing to split that attorney? We'll both just share the same attorney. It'll cut our costs, but we're suing each other. Is that a possibility? Well, clearly the answer is no. You're an idiot for even asking the question. But it happens all the time in commercial real estate. You have people companies that own the building, they lease the building, they manage the building, they're representing the tenants coming into the building, they arrange the financing for the building, and they also have an appraisal firm. And it's unbelievable how the really big companies touch every aspect of commercial real estate. They're a, quote, full service real estate firm. But how is that in the best interest of the client?
Well, I think it's not in the best interest of the client. It's in the best interest of the big companies. And unfortunately, unlike the legal profession, where they have the American Bar Association that says you can't represent two parties. The first thing that happens when you hire a law firm is they do a conflict check to make sure that they're not representing some party that
right.
could be a conflict with you. But that doesn't exist for commercial real estate. And somebody like the National Realtors Association, they could maybe champion that, but they have too many of these big. We're almost to the point of no return with these big companies having influence. And I liken it to like big tobacco, right? Big tobacco denied for years that cigarettes cause cancer, let alone unhealthy for you, let alone
right.
Cause cancer. And I think they still deny it today. Unless you force them that they have to put it on the cigarette pack, but in a press release, they'll never go like, yeah, you're right, it does cause cancer. People are still free to choose to smoke themselves, just as people are still free to use the big five firms if they want to. But boy, you better go in and understand the risks and be confident that you're not subjecting yourself to endless risk.
Yeah, and I see that all the time, and it's frustrating because we're both independents, we strictly represent the user, so we're of course biased ourselves in this conversation. But I think you're right; people really need to take a hard look at it and make an informed decision. All right, we're going to take another break. We'll be right back. We are back talking to Walt Batansky of Avocat Group. Finally, check them out, avocatgroup.com. So, Walt, who is your ideal client?
Well, we've really broken our business down into three different areas. Number one is the complex single transaction. So this might be a corporate headquarters. This might be consolidating several locations into one. We do a lot of M&A work where somebody does an acquisition. They've got duplicity in markets. We're helping them figure out how to get those people together. Maybe it's a build to suit. Maybe they're looking at, do we lease, do we buy, do we build? But we do a lot of those type of transactions where, again, we're in the smart decision business. We're helping people to know what their options are, quantify those, and make the best decision for their particular business. The second segment is multi-location companies. So somebody that has 20 or 50 offices around the country. In the old days, the way of handling that was you let each local manager go out, do their thing, report back to corporate. There was somebody, CFO, VP of finance, maybe general counsel, sometimes the director of HR, would kind of oversee that stuff. Well, for all of those people that I just mentioned, real estate is kind of a thorn in their side. It's just something that somebody put on their plate. So they're not really applying best practices. And one of the challenges with that is you also don't develop a knowledge base with your own business. If somebody figures out the best way to lay out an office or a warehouse in Boston, when it's time for the Phoenix person to do it, they're starting from scratch. They have no experience. They don't know. They haven't learned those lessons. And so you're going through that learning curve.
And there's
every
no
time.
mechanism to transfer that knowledge from Boston to Phoenix either.
Right. We become the knowledge repository for them to help them see that stuff. We become the eyes and ears of sanity. Also many times they're not being proactive. That by the time the guy in Phoenix comes to the CFO and says, hey, we've got to sign this, or our lease is up in 30 days, So they have no choice. They have no ability to negotiate. So we help provide consistency for them and give them a single point of contact.
Okay.
And then finally, the third portion is we do that either one of those two scenarios that I just described, but we do it for law firms, and that's overseen by Eric Burson. Law firms are particularly unique because they don't have a whole lot of assets aside from their people, right? So they don't have inventory. They don't have a lot of other things besides goodwill. And they have to be very flexible. They're acquiring. They have whole practice groups that either come in or leave. They have generally very expensive build-outs, probably the most expensive as office users. So, you want to amortize that over the longest period of time, but you want to make your obligations short enough that you're flexible to expand or contract as you need to. You want to make sure that space is available. So there's a lot more that goes into that. It's just a more complex transaction.
Well, and there's also a lot of partners in law firms typically. So you have a lot of, quote, decision makers, even though there's a managing partner, maybe even a firm administrator, or a CEO who's a business person. There's still a lot of people that have a personal financial stake into it.
You bet. And some of our clients have been around as a law firm for 100 years or have a history going back 100 years. But none of those people want to sign personally.
Of course not.
And nor should they.
They're lawyers. They're not dumb.
Right. But when a landlord looks at that and they look at the balance sheet, because they pass out all the profits every January to the partners, there's not a whole lot of, and it doesn't need to be, but from a landlord standpoint, when they're putting out $1 million for build out or whatever, that sometimes makes them a little hesitant. So
in the case of your number two ideal client, the multi-location around the country, how do you manage that, and how do you, more specifically, how do you compete with the big five firms? Because that's their big thing, is we've got an office in every single city in the world or in the country. How do you handle that from Tampa?
So if a company hires their broker here in Dallas, and on a scale of 1 to 10, with a big five firm, that person's a 10. When they have a transaction in Muncie, Indiana, they call up the person in Indianapolis, because they probably don't have an office in Muncie, and the next person in line for a referral gets handed that, and that might be a 10, but it might be the guy who's green and has only been there 6 months and is going to learn. And they say, drive an hour and a half down to Muncie and take care of this, and we're going to split up the fees 10 different ways. So that person in Muncie isn't necessarily that same level of quality that they had with their person in Dallas. For us, we have a network of over 400 brokers around the country that we've used over the last 30 years, and we can pick the best person. And that may be somebody that's with that big firm, but it also might be some small SIOR who's just been doing it for 20 or 30 years and knows it like the back of his hand. So we can pick the best person based on whether it's office, industrial, whether we need to do a build-to-suit and somebody who knows all the land. We pick the right person, and we just get their local information, and we manage the whole process. So we have a single team that manages that around. So
you're
the
not
country.
required to use anybody in particular.
Not forced to use because they're our brand, right? So we use the right person.
And by the way, SIOR is a professional designation for those that don't know what that means. So in competing with the big giants, conflicts of interest is one of the big knocks against using one of them. Being forced to use whoever the local person is in their shop would be kind of another negative to using that. Are there any others that make an independent broker like yourself a better choice?
Well, certainly the big companies would say that they have more resources, but we're trying to pool together all of our partners for those resources. One of the things that we're doing, I mentioned that we have automated a lot of stuff to empower our people and give them suggestions. We realized that for the money that we're investing in all this technology, you in Dallas or somebody in Chicago or anywhere else could benefit from that too, and it probably makes sense for us to distribute that. So we're just going to distribute that later this year under what we call the Leasing Better platform that will allow anybody who is one of our partners to access that and contribute it. And what's really interesting is about technology is the swarm intelligence. And so swarm intelligence means that anybody can be very smart, but none of us are as smart as all of us collectively. And with swarm intelligence, they've done this with predicting bets, and whatever, very, very similar to the odds makers in Vegas. Swarm intelligence very accurately predicts the results of all kinds of different sports contests or other events. And that's the same way as we can now ask brokers around the country, give us information on what's happening in this market. Do you see it going up? Do you see it going down? What are rates? What are the trends? And so that swarm intelligence is something we're trying to build into this Leasing Better
So that's
platform.
called the Leasing Better platform.
Right.
So the people that will be using that will not be the end user company. It'll be the broker, the professionals that you have a association with.
Well, actually, it's both. So part of our strategy, of course, is digital delivery to our clients. So more and more of us are carrying our phones around, right? And so if our clients want to know information, they should be able to just grab it right off the phone. So we want to be able to push that to them. So it's actually really designed, I guess almost you could compare it to Uber. Uber is bringing two parties together. It's bringing someone standing on a corner with somebody who has a car and is not too far away. When with our platform, somebody who wants to know market information in, say, Memphis, we can match them up with number one, with the information, and number two, with the expert in Memphis. The difference between Uber and us is with Uber, we've all had the experience where we get in the car and it's a Mercedes with nice leather seats and they're playing jazz music and it's just very pleasant. And we've also had the one where the car's a little beat up and it smells like cigarettes and they're playing.
They can't speak English.
Well, whatever. and it's just less pleasant. And there's no loyalty or relationship.
Right.
Ours is going to allow them to create loyalty in a relationship. And actually will allow the brokers to leverage their relationships so that if you're here in Dallas and you've got a client that needs something in Minneapolis, but you don't know anybody up in Minneapolis, it'll allow you to look and see who's out there. It's, in another way, it's almost like Yelp. Swarm intelligence, if you've used Yelp to make a decision on where to eat, that's many people that you don't know putting in their opinions and their experiences, and that allows you to make a more informed decision. So we're going to be doing the same thing, but with commercial real estate.
Now, so swarm intelligence, is that the same thing as like crowdsourcing information?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
synonymous.
crowdsourcing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, like I use the Airbnb quite a bit, but I won't rent a place until after I've read the reviews. Because I want to know.
Sure, of course.
And even if they get all great great stars, I don't limit myself to the stars. I actually read them, and I actually go to the worst reviews and read those too, because I want to see. And then I'll contact the owner and say, hey, did you fix the AC? Did you do whatever? And it's really useful and helpful on so many ways. I mean, you mentioned Uber, I mentioned Airbnb. There's a lot more other ones that are coming and that are already here. And in fact, what's also interesting to me is like we've talked about Uber and Lyft. You would think there's no other opportunity for transportation besides those two, but we had a guy on the show here with a company called Bubble. Well, they have a different model for transportation, and that is they use first responders, off-duty police officers, firemen, other kinds of first responders who, let's say you want to have your kid go to a music lesson and you can't take them because you have a big business meeting. But you call them, you now know you've got somebody who is background checked, who's an active person,
brilliant.
First responder.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Right.
I have another one coming up here soon that's all targeted to women, and it's a membership where you pay a membership. So even though you think something's already there, there's so many different ways to still segment the market. And in commercial real estate, we have a huge specialization in our market where people don't all do the same thing. One real estate broker is not best for everything.
Right.
So I appreciate you coming on the show and talking with us about your specialties, and those are very similar to mine. So Walt, appreciate you being here. For our listeners, please go to Avocat, AVOCAT group.com to learn more. Look for the Leasing Better platform in the future. That'll be coming up. And if you want to know more about the show, go to thenextlevelshow.com or check us out on podcast or YouTube. Just type in The Next Level Show. Be here next week with another great guest.